Okay, so in this video, we're going to be taking a look at Sony A7S III's ProRes files and Sony A7S III's h265 4K HS files that come out from the camera. So as you all know, I've been comparing the Pocket 6K and the Sony A7S III lately, and one thing is apparent. The quality of the internal recording on the Sony A7S III is just no match to the Pocket 6K. And I agree. A lot of people said, hey, you should be comparing Apple ProRes. I ended up getting the Apple ProRes because I was actually really curious as well. With that being said, if you are on a Windows device like I am, you're going to run into the issue with ProRes RAW because right now you have Premiere and Scratch. Because FCP, even though it does support ProRes RAW, I can't get that on Windows unless I do like a Hackintosh. So right now, the NLE support for ProRes RAW is really hard to come by. So now what I'm looking at here is assiimilate Scratch. My fellow YouTuber Dennis told me, hey man, assiimilate Scratch actually will process the ProRes RAW a little bit better. And yeah, he's absolutely correct, and I downloaded the trial, so that's what we're looking at right now. Scratch has a little bit more control than Premiere Pro, which again, doesn't make any sense, because Adobe, as far as I know, is much more popular than assiimilate Scratch, but, let's forget that part. First off, in assiimilate Scratch, this UI legit made me really nauseous last night. The way the UI of this software is just crazy. So what I'm going to do here, just real quick, I'm going to show you what's the difference between this and Premiere Pro real quick. So in assiimilate Scratch, if you go to QuickTime, you can actually adjust your ISO, your Kelvin, and your tint. Right? And you can adjust this stuff here as well. But in Premiere Pro, if you go to the ProRes RAW and I go to Master here, you're going to see that it only has exposure. So assiimilate Scratch, as of right now, December, has more controls, easier controls, than Adobe Premiere. The ProRes RAW NLE support really needs to get resolved. So with that being said, let's go ahead and take a look. Now I'm using a screen capture instead of showing you guys side by side because I don't want the exported version. Sometimes that kind of gets destroyed in a way when you export. So I'm going to show you screen capped in 4K or what the difference are between ProRes RAW and Sony A7S III. So here is a shot of an indoor shot with tungsten light and indoor using the ProRes RAW. And as y'all can guess, it looks amazing. Okay? The ProRes RAW looks fantastic. All right, so here's ProRes RAW, and here is the A7S III internal. Okay, this was shot simultaneously using the same exact settings. Okay, so the first thing that I noticed right off the bat is the quality boost, pretty much the detail boost between ProRes RAW and the. What I'm gonna do is let me go ahead and get rid of the chart. And I'm going to make it bigger, okay? So, Control tilde. This is the ProRes RAW. And this is the A7S III internal. Alright? So, let me go ahead and make sure that we're kind of like in the same frame here. Okay, so here we go. Boom. And again, tilde. So, this is the internal. And this is the ProRes RAW. Right? So, we go internal. ProRes RAW. Alright, so first off, like I said, the quality boost. Looks good. A lot more detail, as you can see right here on her hair. Less blurry. Alright? Now, one of the downsides, and you guys can think, I don't know, you guys can think whatever you want, but to me, looking at this ProRes RAW file, there's definitely a lot more noise. Now, this was shot at ISO 640 f2.8. I light metered it. You're going to see that 640 ProRes RAW is a lot noisier than the A7S III. And my guess, honestly, I don't know if this is the correct thing, but my guess is the Sony A7S III has some kind of noise reduction being done in camera. All right. So if you can see here, a little bit smoother, has more detail, but more noise. Now, some people are actually saying that this ProRes RAW from the Sony A7S III is actually really just a camera. And what Sony is actually doing is they're hiding those noise by applying noise reduction. To be honest, at native ISO, the noise level is actually pretty poor, even at native ISO. But that's ProRes RAW, guys. So now what we're going to do is apply the Sony LUT and just to see if that noise kind of disappears. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and go to the Ninja V. I'm going to have Lumetri here, go to basic correction, and I'm just going to go ahead and load that LUT. Right? And I'm telling you, man, this ProRes RAW looks really good, to be honest. It looks really good. So let me go ahead and go to the Sony A7S III, and I'm going to go to basic correction again. I'm going to load that up. So here you go. And you can see the difference there. And if I make this bigger, let's take a look to see if the noise is still there. If that's the... So this right here is the ProRes RAW, and this is the A7S III. And you can see still that there's still some noise there in the ProRes RAW. And over here, it's a little bit more blurred because I think there's some noise reduction happening there. It still looks pretty darn good. Okay? So, like I said before, I would rather have camera that don't have internal noise reduction because there's a lot of good noise reduction softwares out there that you can use that you can just use in post-production. The only caveat with that is it takes a lot of processing power. That's definitely the only downside of that. It takes a little bit of more power, longer render times whenever you're applying noise reduction in post-production. Okay, so comparing the two, right now so far, pros on the ProRes RAW, you get great quality but more noise. On the Sony A7S III h265 HS 4K, you get less detail, but you do have that noise reduction being applied. So the second thing that I noticed between ProRes and Sony A7S III internally is there is a slight color shift, right? If I go to, this is the Sony A7S III internally, this is the ProRes RAW. Nothing you can't really fix in post, but there is just a slight shift. If you look at her face, slight shift in color when shooting ProRes RAW and internal. What we're going to do now is take a look at some 12,800 ISO. Now, a lot of YouTubers are claiming that 12,800 on the Sony A7S III is the second native ISO of the camera. Now, like I said previously, I don't see anywhere Sony's claiming this. Majority of the YouTubers, the usual suspects, are claiming that this is the dual native ISO. Now, I have used a handful of dual native ISO cameras. When I did my first test between the Pocket 6K and the Sony A7S III, it looked good on the back of the screen, but when I got home and put it on the computer and was looking at it on my 4K screen, I noticed something weird. The 12,800 on the Sony A7S III looked like it was being blurred to reset the noise profile, which I thought was really odd. Now what I'm going to show you is the ProRes RAW, because I was actually interested to see the difference between ProRes RAW at 12,800 and the Sony A7S III 12,800. So let's go ahead and begin. Control tilde. This is the Sony A7S III ProRes RAW. This is the Sony A7S III internal h265 4K HS. Again, my guess is this is what the actual camera look like. This is the noise reduction that's being done in camera to make it look like it is dual native ISO. Noisy, less noisy. Right? Look at this right here. Her face. Look at her face. Less detail, I understand that is going to be less detail, because it doesn't have that much bit rate, but you can still see, if you've seen noise reduction before, if you've used it ever, you will see that there is some type of internal noise reduction happening there. Now again, I'm gonna say it, I don't think this camera has dual native ISO. Let me go ahead and show you this converted to Rec 709 using their LUT. So let's go to basic correction, browse, go to the LUT, and go here, basic correction, LUT again. And I want to show this to you because sometimes having that baked in color gets rid of that noise. So I'm showing you the flat look, but I'm also showing you the Rec 709 look using their LUTs. Alright, so control tilde. Here is the ProRes RAW. Let me go ahead and get a good frame. Alright, right, maybe right here. Alright, so it cleaned it up a little bit. It hit it a little bit, alright? But watch what happens when I switch over to the internal one. There. You can definitely see the blur happening. Because if you look at her face, look at that. There's almost no noise there at all. This is the internal. This is the ProRes RAW. See that? It's really, really smooth at 12,800. If you're planning on getting this camera, let's say you want to shoot a dark wedding, do you want a internal blurriness going on? Or do you want to get the ProRes RAW and get some noise and noise reduce it later in post-production? To me, I said it earlier, if you are going to get the Sony A7S III, you have to get the ProRes RAW. Because to me, the camera was crippled by Sony. Because they don't want to mess up their sales on their higher cameras like the FS6, the Venice, so on and so forth. But the crazy thing is, with the ProRes RAW, I know it's noisy, but it's 12,800, guys. It's gonna be freaking noisy, right? This is extreme situations here with no lights as a backlight from the letters. To me, this ProRes RAW really shows and really says that the A7S III could have been such an amazing camera if they somehow was able to get this internal recording of RAW inside the body. You know, it's just there in that camera, but you have to get the external recorder for you to get the quality out of it. So, with that being said, will the ProRes RAW of the Sony A7S III beat out the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera 6K?